All right, so our three breakouts. First one was members, directors, and committees, rights, norms, and expectations. And in this breakout session, we talked about the different roles, what's working, what can be improved upon. So we'll go over that. The second one was the software repositories. Nash is going to be the representative here. So this is relationships with specifications, tech implementations, and releases. Who has commit access? Yes. We record it. Yeah. And then finally, we've got roadmap, further specifications, which Nathan will be giving us the recap here, which is research and peer review process, formal verification, our chain improvement process. Rest in peace. Okay. All right, so let's start off with Nathan, since he has some content to show here. Here, why don't you grab the mic?
Okay, sorry. So here's we've decided to sort of embrace the RIP pun, at least temporarily, until further discussion by the co-op. Actually, I'm going to start at the end. So this is what we think that it will look like. So we think that it will look like creating a member issue and describing the meeting notes and then basically kind of following a description of a list of action items. Actually, I'm going to pull back. What is going to happen is there is going to be a similar structure, what we think of the EIP, which is the way that Ethereum solves issues and solves processes. So we're going to a member of the co-op will shortly submit a proposal to facilitate that process, and then similar to what Meta has done is that the process will be proposed and it will at least just be a bone structure that people can kind of look at and say, oh, these are the things that we should change about that. But we're going to sort of be modeling our structure after the EIP. And that's kind of a public thing. So here we're just going to be describing what the process is, and then we're going to be describing what tools we use, the requirements, and then implement those changes. And then the people who are the actors that are responsible and accountable and to be informed, and then what are the qualifications of those reviewers. Last part is, this is actually the sort of the larger meeting overview. We obviously started with the porn problem, and we figured out that the solution to, I guess, I'm going to keep going. Okay, so the solution is basically to charge people rent, and the publisher is the guy who pays that rent. And what we're pointing to is sort of the market-driven approach to hosting the data and being accountable. Here we just also discussed the possibilities of, obviously we have a test net, but the possibility of an experimental net, which if there are people who are willing to stand up, validators, and sort of experiment with new features, experimental, which is sort of new things that could become a reality. Greg brought up the point that we thought that the no surprises idea was a little bit naive, that surprises happen, and it's purely a rephrased radical transparency idea. So anyway, that's sort of, I guess, a semantics issue. We've also discussed that the people who are responsible are actually paired based on experience level. So we pair more experienced people with less experienced people to facilitate a more like experiential and learning position. Okay, so and then the more is Meta here? I'm here. Okay, so do you want to talk about Mercury specs?
I'll talk a little bit.
These are the notes. I just don't know what you want to say about them.
So we were talking about post-Mercury, I'm already so loud. Post-Mercury improvement process, right? What does that look like? How do we get feature requests and changes for the platform onto a backlog once we ship Mercury? How are those items voted on? What's the transparency look like? Who does the review? How is it proposed? All of these topics, right? And what the team came away with is that we want to, as a first pass, implement the Ethereum improvement process. It's it's not well documented, but it's established, and it's something that anybody that wants to go look up and see how specific EIPs are proposed and how they work, you can go see that today. What we're going to take on as an action item after the meeting, because I kind of tend to bang a drum that, you know, you can get into a meeting and you can talk about all these great ideas, but unless you do something different on Monday morning, you haven't done anything, right? So as an action item, what we're going to do is create the member issue. We're going to document what the process looks like. What are the requirements for any tools you want to use so we can evaluate, do we want to do it in GitHub? Do we want to do it elsewhere? How would we select reviewers? What would the qualifications for the reviewers be? What would voting look like? Does it flow into a voting process that we're coming up with, right, as part of this governance meeting? So we're going to create an issue to capture all those action items, so at least it doesn't get lost in a bunch of meeting notes. We have it, there's visibility. Community member can opt to pick up the process and start doing some research and vetting some options, et cetera, so we can move the ball down the field. Yes, it gives a label and a name to it as well, right? So we know that it's also for the people that are not in the room, right? So the people that were not, the members that were not able to attend this conference, they can actually see that artifact in the member issue. That this is what we talked about, this is what we're proposing, these are the action items associated with it. What else? We did do a fair bit of divergence, like we took a couple of technical side chains, if you want to call them, and we had to come back and back to the core issue of specifications. What else do you want to talk about?
We have the responsibility to update our readthedocs.io and our architecture documents. And part of that, the most updated version right now is Find the Wiki. Our wiki page, basically, that's like the central sort of authority. So we have the responsibility after setting this up, after the RIP is set up, we have the responsibility to sort of keep our members across nations sort of informed with a verifiable string of events, which is probably links to official co-op pages. And then we got into the discussion about planning for an eventual hard fork and multiple R-chain official forks, which would potentially be mitigated through the use of copyright and trademark on those fork chains. But having a PageRank be a litmus test, and then possibly having another later to be decided like staking algorithm. But I guess the large scale issue that I actually kind of want to meta to talk about is we're kind of figuring it out as we go along, and as long as we're yeah.
So there was a question about, and I've been hearing a lot of questions about roadmap. And we have recently published a roadmap. It's on the wiki. And people are wanting milestones and dates. But understand that we are building something that is very, very ambitious. And Greg has a very big vision that through his force of will has managed to bring us to this point. But now the development team is sitting down and trying to implement his vision. And there's a lot of pieces that we've not yet figured out actually how it's actually going to work. And so what we have been doing is in about 4 to 6 week chunks, figuring out pieces of that as we go along versus trying to just say, yep, we've got it all figured out from here to December, right? We're not taking that approach. We are trying to deliver, our goal is to deliver incremental value every month to demonstrate that we are getting closer and closer to Mercury. So that's why you will see me kind of not put dates out there for later on in the year, because that's a signal that there's still stuff that the team is actively working to try to solve. And I have been pushing really hard on the team to write down what you have learned. If you go into a meeting and you come to a decision and you come to an implementation decision, you write it down immediately, like codify it. So we know that we are actually making these decisions and getting closer to finality, getting closer to consensus, getting closer to knowing what we need to build for Mercury. Yes, Kit. There's a mic?
There's a term you used a while ago, which I think everybody... There's a term that Meta used in a debrief, I think, which stuck in my head, and I think everybody should remember it when being asked about the roadmap, and that is there is a cone of uncertainty. If you think about it, it really makes sense, and when you explain it to things, people understand it. So we should use that repeatedly.
It's actually a technical term in project management and estimation. Cone of uncertainty is very well known when it comes to project planning. And as you get closer and closer to the release, that cone gets thinner and thinner. So if you imagine it's like a funnel, right? The further you're away from the point, the greater the uncertainty is. And as you get closer, it becomes more and more narrow. Other questions?
Right, so before we move on to questions, sorry, I'd like to just get through all of the summaries first, right? And that's just because we're going to try to get through this relatively quickly, so hopefully we can make sure we get through the content first before we jump in. Okay.
Okay, so we were covering software repo and governance of software in and of itself. And so interestingly, we covered a number of the same topics that this other group talked about. And we started closer. So one of the questions that we started out with is basically just asking who should have commit access to the repositories. And in particular, what we were talking about was the rchain/rchain repo, not the member repo or any of the side repos for bounties and stuff like that, but focusing on just the software itself and how we were going to govern that. And one of the big questions that fell out of that is whether the co-op itself should actually have formal governance responsibilities for the code. And so it sounds like the answer coming out of this group was a definite yes, but we actually had an alternative perspective in our group that suggested that that's actually not what you want, right? Because when the software is governed by the co-op can be sued, and it can have judgments against it that could force it to make changes to the code that aren't in the best interest of the community as a whole, right? And so it's important as we design processes like the RIP or whatever, to contemplate whether or not you want an organization to own something that can become, if it can become a target of judicial or state interference, right? One of the issues that comes up when you start talking about improvement protocols, like the EIP or the RIP, is exemplified by some drama that's happening within the Ethereum community right now, right? Right before this conference started, an EIP was proposed that would create a process within the Ethereum community for making unusual state changes to the blockchain. And the specific goal was to allow the funds that were frozen.
No, power on. Power to the board, wait, just wait. Oh.
Now? All right. So the specific EIP was intended to create a process by which the funds that were frozen in Parity wallets could be unfrozen for people. And obviously there are corporate interests and wallet holders that are interested in seeing this done, right? But there are a number of community members, and if you go on the GitHub for this EIP, you can see that a significant number of the comments, if not the overwhelming majority, are negative, right? Do not do this, don't implement this process. Don't create a general mechanism by which transactions can be altered in the past so that funds can be recovered because it violates the notion of an immutable blockchain. The EIP editorial board, which is 4 or 5 volunteers, right, who are not paid and are not members of the Ethereum Foundation or anything like that, they had decided about a week ago to table this EIP, right? So they weren't going to consider it until more time had passed and people had had time to comment and think about it thoroughly and argue about it and post on blogs and all that stuff. But due to pressure, and it's not entirely clear where the pressure was coming from, the editor that was in charge of this specific EIP felt that he was under, there was a strong pressure from parts of the community for him to go ahead and push forward with it. And because on the one hand, he believed that the EIP was probably not what the community wanted, and on the other hand, because of specific laws that apply to him as a Japanese citizen, he resigned from the editorial board rather than approve the EIP or even consider it, right? As an organization, we should be very careful about creating processes where one cabal of people in our organization can boil off volunteers who are trying to act in the best interest of the community, because they're likely to be replaced by people who are more self-serving, right? And when you create processes that accidentally boil off your best and most community-oriented volunteers, you can end up with editorial boards who act, more less ethically, right? And this creates significant opportunity for shenanigans, let's say. So that's sort of a summary of the Ethereum drama as we understand it, and some of the issues that we should consider with regard to the RIP. We also came up with the idea, it sounds like this other group came up with the idea of having a stable versus an unstable chain. We really liked that idea and discussed ways to allow the development team to move very quickly on the unstable branch so that they could implement features and bug fixes and could try things out in an area where there were some economic impacts, but where everybody who was economically involved was a volunteer, right? Where you're like, I'm willing to go and live on the experimental branch. We didn't want it to be completely free of economic impact, right? That didn't feel quite right, but it felt like there was a real opportunity to have both the stable and the unstable branch, similar to the Linux kernel, and for most people to live on stable while the dev team can go and run as quickly as they want on unstable. For what it's worth, we envisioned this stuff coming along farther down, later this year, right? Most of the formal process surrounding the technology evolution and the political evolution of the blockchain would come after Mercury was more or less stabilized and we had a fairly reliable blockchain that we all agreed worked more or less the way we wanted. One of the issues that we spent a fair amount of time talking about is what the source of legitimacy for governing source code is, and there were sort of 2 fundamental characteristics that we felt represented the basis for legitimacy for managing the source code. And one of them was the fact that the community can fork the project and go elsewhere if the co-op misbehaves, right? So this is a voluntary organization in the blockchain that we're all participating on together. If it gets subverted by interests that don't represent the group as a whole, we can always take the source code, fork it into another GitHub repo, and proceed to implement all the features over there. And then those who don't want to follow, don't follow, but there it is. This is another argument in favor of potentially not having the co-op own the repositories in the long run. Something to think about. And the other source of legitimacy was the effectiveness and the execution of the dev team, right? The ability to continuously deliver incremental improvements that get us closer and closer to our long-term goals. And then once we've launched the network, to be able to maintain it and fix bugs and then add features that are significant. Let's see. I think that was most of it. Does anybody from my group want to tell me to talk about something else. I think that's everything. So, one other issue that we noted as a technical matter in both Bitcoin and Ethereum's improvement processes. These improvement processes are gated by code that checks basically the block height, and that this represents a sort of activation height for the feature, right? An EIP is put in and somebody implements the feature, and there's a chunk of code that says if block height greater than blah, then this feature is live. This is actually not obviously doable with namespaces, and so we have to think really long and hard about how to implement that specific feature in our chain, because we may not be able to do it trivially in the way that Ethereum and Bitcoin currently do that. Without that feature, the RIP process doesn't really have a whole lot of, there's not a lot of traction for actually making that go the way that you would normally want to make it go, right? So we would have to look at figuring out some other technical process for allowing people to bring code into their deployments and then wait until a majority of the network actually accepted that code before it was live. So that's something to think about. Everybody should think about that because we couldn't figure it out.
So our group discussed the various cohorts within the co-op, from membership to board of directors to committees. And so essentially we're just gonna really run down exactly what the role of each one of those groups is and does and what their responsibility is. So members, the question was posed to the group, which was, what does it mean to be a member? And it's not exactly clear to everyone. And to begin with, it's not exactly clear to where to find the information about what a member is. And so just generally, it's on GitHub. I believe Ian said it was Article 4, Section 2, which, yeah, it's on GitHub. You can find it. But, and so what does it mean? It's stated in that section that a member has the right to vote on member meetings that happen annually and on special meetings. So, and then there was the concept of an active member sort of nebulously being able to participate in a rebate on revs for running dApps. That was something that was sort of hard for some people to get their head around, because the incentive there is driven by monetary gain for running dApps, which is why you would get the rebate. So that was something that the group discussed, but some members felt uncomfortable about, and so there's a need to really drill down on what it means to be a member. So all members can, any member rather, can call a special meeting, and then through a quorum of 10% of the membership, a special meeting would be had, and then they could place a vote on whatever that topic would be. But then the issue is how do you get to communicate to all members so that you can get to a quorum? So what we don't have today are the tools to be able to enable that, right? And so not every member participates on Discord. Not everyone participates on Telegram. Emails sometimes get ignored. So what we need to really think about is a way to centralize, maybe perhaps through a dashboard on member.rchain.coop that would have a list of all of different items that could be voted upon, and members are notified, and it's incumbent upon the member to log in and go and find out what's going on. So it's incumbent upon them to be an active member. And that way, sort of being informed is the responsibility of the self. So some of those suggested tools I mentioned was the membership dashboard. One member suggested a mobile app that would be sort of a wallet / ID / some sort of way for everyone who has a smartphone, which most of us do, to be able to participate. One thing that we could do today is to have a active member channel on Discord for those that want to participate that way. The members also found that there was need for like an onboarding process, which I thought was really important, right? And so if you can't find out what a member has the right to do, that means that you don't have a really good process for getting a member on board and then pointing them in the right direction for them to find the information that's required. So one of the suggestions was that perhaps we set up some sort of membership committee, right? Who would then perhaps pair a new member with another member, sort of like a member buddy system, if you will, right? And then that member who has been active for some time would then enable one to, point them to information, help them out with sort of what the protocol is, indoctrinate them into the culture of the community, and really get them set up so that they feel welcome. And then there would be perhaps a second layer, which would be something like a mentorship sort of system where if a new member wanted to learn how to participate further, whether that means through committees or helping out in different ways on GitHub or whatever that could be, or through development, that mentor could help them. And that mentor would likely be somebody who's sort of participating a bit more deeply than other members. So we also discussed the board of directors and their primary role, which was oversight of the officers, and to vote on resolutions as they were presented to the board. The resolutions, again, for those who don't know, they're posted on GitHub. So again, a lot of that information is posted there once it's finalized. How does one become a director? That's also listed in the bylaws on GitHub. But they need to make their intention known to the board, and then that is voted upon at the annual member meeting. So there are currently 9 board members, 3 currently with a 3-year term, 3 with a 2-year term, and 3 with a 1-year term. It was also suggested that the board find the right sort of balance and tone and communication, communicating back to the membership. So I know there was the no surprises that was mentioned earlier. But I think it was more so about members wanting ethical, transparent, accountable, and an honest board. And I think that, probably covers exactly what you mean by no surprises, which is that you're looking for transparency, because surprises occur. I don't think there's any way to prevent that from happening. Moving on to committees, there are 3 committees: the executive, nominating and governance, and the comp committee. And then we really just went over what the role of each one of those committees were. The nominating committee role is to nominate members to serve on committees or on the executive committee. The compensation committee's role is to set policy and procedure for co-op officers and board of directors. And by the way, policies have been set for compensation for the board of directors, and that information is probably on GitHub. It will be. All right, so again, GitHub seems to be a central source of truth. So, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to crawl through, but you can find what you need there if you're really diligent about it, if you're really being an active member. And then the executive committee, which is there to help with the working groups or be a conduit for the membership to the board and take on and discuss some of the issues that the membership may have, and come up with ways possibly to improve upon some, wherever there's gaps in coverage. That was essentially it.
All right. Thanks for that great recap, everyone. Okay, so what we're going to do now is something a little bit different. So instead of going right into answer questions, we are going to have a time of interaction. And I'm going to invite Matrix, what was the last part? Works, to come and facilitate that interaction between. Yeah, there you go.
So we're going to introduce a little technology that I think will be helpful to you. And it's somewhat evocative, provocative. And it's called the fishbowl. How many people are familiar with this? Can I see your hands? Not so many. Okay, good. That's fine. So in order for a community to really grow in terms of a balance of individual and collective intelligence, the community needs to be able to see itself. And as I said the first day, I'm working with a definition of health that says health is the integration of differentiated parts. So we'd like to do a fishbowl with some of the parts of the community, and if this will be facilitated by the new MatrixWorks team, which includes 2 of the team from our chain, and also Kenny will join us. And we're going to start with the officers. We'll do the officers, the board members, the executive committee. And I understand there's a great deal of overlap with these groups. So we'll see how that works. But if you are an officer of our chain, please bring a chair and come to the center. Is this clear what I'm saying? And you will be around us, watching us and then participating with us.
Well, we don't have the CFO here. We don't have the CFO. But that is it.
We don't have a CFO.
We don't have the CFO here.
Can we have someone sit in to represent the role?
That would probably be me. Yeah.
That's you?
Yeah.
Okay.
You have 2 heads.
I've got a lot of heads, actually.
Huh? We only have 4 or 5 people?
It's like, well, no, Vlad's going to be a board. So 1, 2, 3,
Okay,
4.
so you are the officers.
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, just these 3.
Okay. Well, let's start for just a couple of minutes here. Then we'll bring
these
in
3.
the what?
Just these 3 would be officers.
So just you 3 are the officers, and you need to sit across from Ed. So trade places with Greg, please. And then we have a nice triad. I don't think I've met you. Evan. Hi, Evan. And so what is your role, Evan?
As an officer, I'm the secretary, and I'm also the counsel for Arching Cooperative.
Secretary and counsel, okay. And you are?
Yeah, I'm Kenny. I'm the Chief Operating Officer, and I will
Yes.
also be representing the CFO.
And you're representing the CFO. Would you like someone else to represent the CFO? Are you okay with?
No, I can do that.
You can
Her and
do
I
both?
work closest together. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
And
then it would go to Greg.
you are?
I'm Greg, and I'm the president of Arching Cooperative.
So, and Sarah is with MatrixWorks, and Ed is here representing our joint facilitation team, as is Ian. So, go ahead.
Nope,
You want
don't
to
have anything.
No? Greg, what is your greatest challenge in your role?
That's good. I think probably the
Just talk in here. Ignore everybody else.
okay. So the biggest challenge I have for my role is the dissemination of information. So I'm collating, collecting a lot of information. I'm collating, collecting a lot of the information, but getting it out to interested parties is bloody hard. There are too many channels, too many people, and a lot of people who, really, really want the information. So, yeah.
So, do you believe or do you experience that the community trusts you in your role?
Astoundingly, yes. I believe that the community has vested a lot of trust in me, and I appreciate that. It's very humbling.
Greg, what are the behaviors that you think support or challenge the trust that has been placed in you?
So with respect to support, I think one of the biggest things has just been the Arching Community Hangout. So every week at 11 a.m., Pacific time, we sit in front of the community and we say, this is what we've done, this is what we're going to do, and people get to compare the two. And more generally, this act of transparency. So everything that we're doing to the best of our abilities is put on some public channel, whether it's GitHub or Discord or Skype or whatever. So I think that transparency has been part of what creates the trust. I think vice versa, when we haven't been able to act as if we're transparent for whatever reason, that creates, that sort of challenges the community. I think the ventures deal was an example where, you know, I just had too many irons in the fire and I couldn't act fast enough to get all the information to all the people.
We have another, oh, you have a microphone. Yeah, give it to Greg. We're going to keep going. Is this line of inquiry okay?
Yeah, sure.
Because this really is an experiment in both individual and collective inquiry. And I think while we're inquiring with you, I want to go just a little deeper.
Sure.
When you look, I don't know the details of the ventures deal. Sounds like that you weren't able to get the information to enough of people, and that really created a warble or some,
Yeah, absolutely.
some chaos, and maybe even some lack of trust. I don't know.
Sure.
When you look back on that, what could have been done, or in the future, what could you do to prevent that kind of thing from happening, or what would you want to do?
Well, I think really the co-op membership has more expectation about being involved very early in decision-making processes. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to do that. Mm-hmm. I think...
Who would you, wait just a second, if you look around who's in our circle, who would you turn to ask for some feedback about the ventures deal?
Everyone here.
Well, choose one.
Okay, Ed.
Okay.
Okay. Do you need a lozenge for your throat? I
No,
know
I
you've
have
got
a
a little.
lozenger.
You have a little cold.
I'm good, thanks.
You okay. Yeah. How would you respond, Ed?
How would I respond to provide Greg feedback about ventures deal?
And talk to him.
Yeah, Greg, I generally agree that it went fast with imperfect information flow, or not complete information flow, and to me, even to this day, there's incomplete information. Somebody was asking about whether the end of December board meeting minutes or resolutions were signed off on, and someone said they weren't yet. So, for me personally, I didn't study the details of the venture deal, because I knew the basic shape of it. But yeah, so I agree with your assessment that people wanted to be involved earlier, and they wanted more facts earlier. Yeah, and I had asked you for, redacted versions or preliminary versions be published earlier than they ended up being. So I was disappointed that wasn't out there earlier, even in a draft state.
So you have a request that in the future, going forward, that information be more complete and maybe offered in a more timely way? I'm just trying to frame the request.
Well, I'm referring back to a specific request I made to Greg that I wish he had followed through on.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just my interest; it was the interest of the community more at large. I think one of the topics that came up in the earlier sessions, I think was, can the roughly paraphrase, can the president do anything, spend any amount of money? And my interpretation is yes, until the board restricts that role. The bylaws, don't, unless there's a specific budget and so forth. And I think, roughly speaking, you interpret it the same, that not that you take advantage of that, but I think that expectation around what the community expects, what the membership expects, what the board expects, and what you do isn't perfectly aligned, and that's not unusual. but it's a source of tension.
So what's the effect on you, Greg, of that summary or that sort of the predicament of how do you get out the information? How do you meet your own expectations regarding transparency?
Yeah, I was just, as I was listening to Ed, I was thinking about the time that was taking place.
Yeah.
And thinking about all the things that were happening at that time.
Yeah.
So at that time, I was personally hacked. Right? I was attacked. The hacker stole $300,000 from the co-op, and they went after my own personal funds. So there was a lot to clean up there.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, we had this ongoing issue around the end of year sale, which became this runaway train, and it was Christmas.
Yeah.
So I reached my limit.
Right.
And I was traveling.
Right.
And we were up against the deadline. So I had literally reached my limit of the total number of things that I could handle and process. And so I think what I realize now is that I needed to ask for help faster.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yes, please.
So I want to echo that from you, Greg. And it's really amazing. And I don't think it's coincidental that we live a mile apart from each other.
There's something in the water.
Right? So I just want to say personally to you, I know what it's like to be underwater. And if you need somebody to pull you up, call me. Or
Thank you.
Or literally knock on my door.
Be careful, I might take you up on that.
Yay! Now that is cooperative. Yeah, yeah. And I think, Sarah, maybe you would want to comment too, but just to hear a leader say, I reached my limit, I couldn't perform any better because of these real circumstances, and I feel in you and looking at you and just your energy that there's a commitment to ask for help sooner. Yeah? What would you add?
The transparency is striking. Just sitting here and being able to hear that kind of feedback and owning up to, hey, this is what was going on in my life. And as I hear the room around us, it sounds like they know what that might feel like, and that they're here, all of them are here right now because they want to support this community. So, yeah, speaking up and asking for support sooner, and then knowing that you've got a lot of people who've got your back here must feel good.
It does. The other thing that I think I really like about this community is that they recognize that we are going to make mistakes, and that it's possible to make reparations. Like one of the things that I was so happy about was the community actually voiced a lot of concern about the ventures deal. And I don't think I heard it perfectly the first time. But one of the things we did hear was about the structure of the deal. We also heard some comments about the process. But and I was slower to the process part, the uptake on the process part than I was on the structure of the deal. But that structure went back into the deal was completely restructured on the basis of the community feedback. And then we still got it wrong, and the community was still upset. And we after we'd already signed the deal, we went back to Ventures and said, the community's upset about this point. Can we fix this point? And Ventures said, hell yeah, that makes a total sense. We'll go back and retroactively fix the deal. And so to me, this is amazing, right? When does this happen in business? When does this happen in business? Right? So that eased my heart about the mistakes I'd made.
Yeah, because it sounds like you had the direct experience of the system being challenged, and the system responding in a way that made it even more trustworthy. So that the chaos that arose from the ventures deal has actually opened the door for greater connection and for deeper trust. Yeah. And that's your aspiration. Yes. Yeah. Would you say something, and also you? Well, just how this is affecting you.
So I'm going to respond to the same question that you asked Greg, which is, what is the most challenging part of this, right?
Yeah.
And the problem that I seem to encounter often is that there is literally no way to make every single person in a large population happy. No matter what you do, somebody is going to come to you and be like, that was not exactly what I wanted. And there's just, you go left, you go right, it doesn't matter. So you do the best you can. You give your reasons, like this is the reason why this is the right thing to do. And people who will ignore your justification for this is why it is the optimal course and still be like, that's not what I wanted, you sort of say like, I'm sorry, that was just not what was decided.
Yeah. Like there's some healthy boundary setting, huh? That you do your best, and not everyone is going to be happy with it, but you know you've done your best. Is that what you're?
Yes.
Yeah. And would you like people to change and be satisfied?
Well, I'm glad that people are involved. There's a huge, way more participation than like I would have estimated a year ago that this is happening. But at the same time, if they're keeping us on our toes, it's like it's a hard place to be constantly on your heels.
Yes. Yeah. The cost of participation. We want it, and there are some costs.
Look at me. Why is everybody looking at me?
Yeah. And
so I want to just quickly comment about what we're kind of dealing with as leaders here.
Yeah.
And there's a common misconception from someone looking at any leader at any given position that said, if that were me, I'd do it differently. It wouldn't be like that.
Yeah.
And it's an easy thing to think. And I even fall into that trap myself as someone who aspires to lead.
Yeah.
And what typically happens, someone who steps up to volunteer to lead, they find out that, leaders they're not most of the time, they're not malicious. They're just doing their best. And being in that position just has a particular, you have to make decisions. And like what you said, you can't make everybody happy. But I would say also that what we're trying to build here together is not a power structure where we're trying to make leadership better or anything like that. What we are trying to do is redefine what leadership is. Leadership is not control. Right. Leadership is not dictation. Leadership is service, compassion.
Yeah.
And we are all leaders.
Right.
And we all have a part to play.
Yes.
And if we do this right, there will be so many leaders and so much collectiveness and intelligence here that the self can take care of itself.
Yes.
It'll be self-sufficient. It won't need a Kenny and a Greg or any individual per se. If we can do this right.
Yeah, you're right. You're trying to redefine leadership as service and as the capacity to cultivate excellence in others. It's no longer a singular job, I think. It's got to be a collective function that anyone can step into. I want to hear from you, please.
Sure.
How is this for you?
This is wonderful. I had heard Ed asking a couple weeks ago that part of our program here includes a retrospective so that we can revisit issues that had come up. And here we're doing it, kind of a little bit impromptu. Naturally, it's happening. And, complicated situations like this, community, we definitely heard you on this. And look what happened. The deal was restructured. And now moving forward, we actually have a better model so that in future deals, we have like we have something really cool that actually came out of the community. So we're evolving, we're growing, our processes are getting better. So it's very, very heartening to see. Yeah.
And finally, with this, going back to Ed.
Yes.
And what would you want to say to Greg now?
I don't know.
Well, it's like we're completing. There was there was a wave, and now we're completing. And how does it land in you now?
Yeah, just as you're probably aware, and as Kenny was saying, we all want to be servant leaders, right, and to inspire, but people look up to you, and your opinion carries a lot of weight. So just be aware of that. And so to tap into collective decisions, there's always this balance between, you are the president, you're the leader of the co-op, and so even when you don't necessarily want to, it's your nature to take leadership on certain issues. So just that's tough to balance it. And I think the other thing that has made it challenging for me over really the last year is you move very fast on a lot of things. And so for me personally, it's sometimes faster than I'm comfortable with. And so I imagine, especially for others in the community that have sometimes less information than I might have, it's confusing or incomplete. So the regular communication is great, but sometimes just making sure certain details are communicated as well. And just in the Communication Act, you may need help. Yeah. It's not just what you do and decide, but how it's communicated.
Does it feel complete for you? Or is there anything else that you want to say?
Well, first of all, it feels great. I mean, I'm really glad to have this communication.
Yeah. Just deep breath. Now let's everybody take a breath. I mean, even in the outside. I'm not talking to you, but please take a breath.
And I think that the only other thought that has been left unvoiced in my mind is I keep remembering a conversation I had with Nash at the developer retreat where Nash was talking about how in his view authority really has to do with being able to get out of the way to put ourselves to put the community in touch with the divine or their higher self.
Yes.
And so I think that's an aspect of service, I guess. But, I hope I got it right, Nash.
Yeah. Okay, you can't do that.
Could you make that more concrete or an example? I'm having trouble connecting that up with an example.
Well, I mean, if I just go back to the other the example we have on the table right now, right? I mean, I didn't really feel particularly in a position of leadership. What I really felt was I was in the position of trying to serve the co-op, right?
Yeah.
On the one hand, I know that there's this requirement to get all these applications on the platform. This is a requirement, right?
Yeah.
We're not, even with the rate we're going, we're going to have maybe 20 applications signed up to build on the platform when the system goes live. By comparison, the Apple App Store had 500 applications when it launched.
Okay.
Right? So that's a requirement. On the other hand, I know that the community has a lot of wisdom about the structure of the deal.
Yeah.
Right? And so I was happy to just put aside any worries or concerns about I screwed up.
Yeah.
And just make it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And I feel like following that impulse makes it possible for other people to follow that impulse. Right?
So
does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Can I coach you a little bit? Yeah. Okay. So if it feels true for you. Could you say to this group in here, and especially to Ed, something like, I hear your request of me, and to the best of my ability, I'm willing to try to meet your request for timely information, for whatever you feel like you're hearing, for it seems like it's for whatever arises for you.
Okay. So I hear your request for timely information, transparency, and early engagement in the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I hear your request to ask you for help.
Yeah. And you can't make everybody happy all the time.
And I know that I can't make I know. As a father, I know I can't make everybody happy all the time.
Yeah. All right. So now, if you feel it's also right, Sarah, I would invite a few people to come and stand behind someone whose comment felt like it really resonated with you, and just offer a word or two to us, so participating in that way. So please come, a few people. And you can stand behind Greg, behind Sarah, behind me, anybody. Just come and place a hand on the shoulder if you would, and express your response. Here, say it out loud.
Oh, I thought Greg's statement was really like a just profound statement of like humility and service, and really aspirational in leadership, and so that was great.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
Still stay there. And then how about you?
Yeah. Okay. Evan, as an officer, eventually you got to make a decision, and not everybody's going to be happy, and it's true and a good thing to sort of put out there.
Oh, you got one. Okay.
I wanted to endorse Kenny's response about if you need help, please come. As a former business owner myself, there were many times when I just felt it was all my responsibility and I did not ask for help, and it crushed me many times.
Yeah. Thank you. Beautifully said.
So what's the parameters of our response?
It should be brilliant and brief.
What I'm noticing from you, Ed, is I feel like you feel like we're trying to edge you out. And no one is trying to edge you out. We all want you in.
Yes. Oh, wow. There's a big resonance with that in the group. Resonant in the group? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, let's hear it. Yeah, okay. Wait, first her, and then you.
So, Ed, I wanted to echo what you said about communications and just getting help. And I think that perhaps rather than waiting for crisis, which is common for leadership, to build in structures where it's not actually up to you to do the communications, or that there's some kind of routines and that someone else is responsible to get that information from you and out to the community.
Oh, yay.
And I just wanted to echo the words that you guys said.
Use the mic.
I just wanted to echo the words that you guys said, which is, I think is an example of leadership that's new.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that's a contribution to everybody.
Oh. All right. Round of applause. Oh, wait, we have one more.
I just wanted to emphasize what Kenny said, and I think what you're doing as well is if we want to have new paradigms, and this is like our chain itself is a new infrastructure with a new paradigm, and the management structure is like leading by example is the paradigm we wished for, right? And I think it's really hard because if you have sometimes negative feedback from a community, it feels like a critique and feels like an attack. But I think it is also really good to understand that this is actually a helpful feedback, and a lot of people criticize not the person, but they do that because they want to support a better decision-making process. So I only want to support that approach to the new leadership paradigm there.
Whoa. Okay. You want to say? Okay.
What I just heard in this last comment was they give you the feedback, even if it sounds negative, they're giving it because they really care, and that they are here and they have your back and they have each other's back.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And
I remember when you spoke the first day about being present at the births of your children, and this is another child, and you're present at the birth, and it's a long one. A long labor.
Absolutely, and I just want to reflect back to you. Absolutely, we do relish and cherish all the feedback we get. I mean, I hope people feel that, like whenever I'm in the Discord channel or wherever, we love all of your feedback, whether it's negative, positive, neutral, inquiring, commanding, whatever it is. We really relish it. It's actually the engagement that makes this real.
Yay. So, Greg, last thing for you. How are you feeling in your body right now? What are you aware of in your body?
Honestly, I got a little choked up. It was.
I could see that.
Yeah, it was.
Like a lot of feeling.
Yeah, a lot of feeling came up. Yeah.
And so, I want you to stand, if you will. Stand up and just look around. Look outside the fishbowl. These are your people. Yeah, you are tribe. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, a round of applause, please. So I need a time check. Okay, so what makes sense? Think with me. So that felt like a big piece, yeah? I don't know if we could do one more big piece, if we need new people in here, if we should move to the executive committee. Help me, I don't know what to do. Okay, go ahead.
The problem with the board is that there are at least 2 members of the board that are not here at the conference, and I'm not sure that all the board members are that were at the conference are here. Like, we have Vlad who could come and join us. And David, does that give us a quorum? Yeah, okay, so we can do the board then, sure.
We can do the board. Is that the best thing to do? Are we just, okay. Okay, board, please come. But will you guys change seats except for Sarah? Just move around a little bit. And you two still need to sit across from each other.
2 extra chairs.
You have to end up.
Well, it's okay. I'll let it go. You just want to sit across from your co. A lot of guys. Where are the women? Where are the women?
The chairs for the missing board members.
I'd like to have them represented. I don't like empty chairs.
Who can represent these people?
Kit, could you represent HJ?
I want you to help us a little bit with this one. Yeah. Give me some context why this is important.
Why is it important?
Yeah.
Why to have this group?
Yeah. From your perspective.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's important for a couple reasons. That everyone in the room here can see who's here.
Okay.
And also that everyone out there can see who's in here.
Yeah.
All right? Yeah, that's why it's important.
Okay.
It's part of, and the question was, why is that important? And it's part of a shared knowledge and somewhat coordination in the sense of, or even identity.
Yes, identity.
Identity.
Yeah.
Faces to names. And can I give an example?
Please.
That involves Vlad.
Okay.
Okay. So we're part of the birth of the RChain community, and Vlad was
Okay.
part of the birth of the Ethereum community. And in that community, my role in that community was as a member of the community looking in on that leadership, right?
Wow.
So from my perspective, the guy sitting right next to me, it's a little awe-inspiring, right? Because this
Wow.
is somebody that I've watched for years, who I've admired, who has a brilliant intellect, who embodies something that it was so important in my life that has changed the course of my life.
Wow.
Right here. And now we're working together,
Wow.
right? And so what I want to say to the larger group out there is that for you who are watching, and there will be more of these people and more faces and more discussions and more talk and more excitement and more possibility, that you can participate in that. You can. It's up to you to decide how you want to do that, and that's really an empowering thing, I think.
Wow. And will you ask him what happens when you hear that? Ask him what happens when he hears that.
Oh, mostly I feel embarrassed.
And stay with that, but go a little deeper. And what else is there?
I guess I'm also like, grateful to have had the opportunity and the platform that I've had. I feel, pretty lucky to have been involved early and worked on Casper and sharding stuff with Greg since before our chain was even named. I think the whole tech story has been really exciting to be a part of.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to be a part of the tech governance side of the story.
Yeah.
Because it is, I think, powerful technology.
Yeah. Yeah. And will you look at him?
Hey, Kenny.
And say something like "I love you."
Yeah, I mean, I think you're awesome, Kenny. I think you're probably one of my favorite art chainers.
Yeah. Oh, yum yum.
I don't want to give a ranked ordering, but
Yeah. He's number one, huh?
one of the first,
number one.
one of the favorites.
Yeah.
It's not a total order.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That's very useful. So we're still doing names and people, right? Roles? Yeah. And you want to pass the mic and just say your role and you're trying to steal my employee.
Well, I'm here to represent HJ, who is in the Netherlands, and I believe he'll be joining us via video tomorrow to have a presence here. And I wouldn't feel comfortable trying to proxy his thinking or his words or anything. I'll just say that his experience is different from mine, and he's coached me at critical times about how to behave in a decentralized environment, which I find really valuable.
And you're the guy who's asking for no big surprises, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I felt something when you were talking about that, so we'll come back to you about that. Okay.
Please.
All right. And how does this feel to you, Sarah? It's a lot of guys.
It is a lot of men.
It's a lot.
There are women here in the room.
Yeah.
I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
I need to hear from more people.
Okay. Greg wants to say.
I just wanted to say that our CFO is female, and
I can represent her.
and unfortunately she's not on the board. Right. She's like a 10th board member. She comes to all the board meetings. But yeah, I really had hoped there would be more leadership, more female leadership, and I'm working actively as hard as I can to make that happen. We just hired Lilia as general manager for the co-op. So I feel like the most stable leadership structures include lots and lots of women.
Should Lilia be in this circle?
Why not? Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. Okay, let's keep going.
So I'm representing Alexander Balkin at Coin Fund, who is an advisor on the co-op, a board member on the co-op. So, and what are the parameters of this response to be, Mukara?
What's a hotspot?
A hotspot for Alex has been when we first started discussions. I'll quote him. He said, "I just want to strap Greg to a chair and have him explain everything to me until it's all explained."
He's probably not the only one who has that deep longing.
So that is a good quote that I feel like I'm legitimately allowed to share.
Wonderful.
But from Coin Fund's perspective, they're interested in building and funding software that they feel represents an empowering community.
Sorry.
So Coin Fund wants to build good software and they want to fund good software. So, however, they could get that facilitated is what Alex would support, I suspect.
Okay. Thank you.
And then as far as the women thing, it is, I don't know how to build that. There aren't structures that are impeding that, but it is a very clear marker that as we discuss the parameters of the populations we're trying to represent, if they're not like physically represented here, how do we represent those populations?
Yeah. It's an issue. And you are on the...
I'm a director, so I'm a board member.
Okay.
And I'm just extremely grateful to be here, and I feel my job is to represent all these members the members that we hear from loudly, as well as the members who we don't hear from, which are many, many out there. We have, at this point, a good 950 paid members. And if you look around the room, how many do we have here in this room?
You've met more of them face-to-face than me.
That's right. I have, and but there are many members who haven't done the whole verification, but they're still members. We have to look out for them as well. And so I feel part of the duty of being a board member is even when we hear the cacophony of all the very loud voices, that we have to also consider all those that aren't in the room and that aren't speaking up. So they have to be represented.
Any hot spots that you're aware of in this group?
In this group, well, I'm so glad that we hit on some of them today. I was a little concerned, like I wasn't sure when I looked at the format of the program whether we were going to get to all this stuff, but I see that it is happening, and it really makes me feel much more confident in all of us going forward that we can bring these things up and deal with them and grow.
Yeah, there's a saying in some of the organizational development work that says we have to wake up, but we also have to show up, and most importantly, we have to grow up. And the growing up, I think, is this willingness to look at how we're doing and to make the repair and the self-correction along the way. So our our maturity is inevitable.
Yeah, and thank you for facilitating this.
You're welcome. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I guess the remark I'd like to make is there's a lot of idealism among people here and the people in the community.
Mhm.
And I'm very much in favor of wide-eyed, like, let's imagine what could happen. But after you've decided what it is that you want to do, you've got to kind of like, okay, now pragmatism, reason, let's actually get down to details and actually do this thing. And the idealistic part of you doesn't actually make it happen. So, I mean, it's kind of easy to just restate your ideals
Yes.
rather than reducing it to a concrete, specific, okay, this specific thing
Yeah.
is that ideal's instantiation.
Yeah.
And as part of that,
Yeah.
like you were talking about how there's no women on the board
Yeah.
of directors, these people are the people who said, I want to be a director for the election.
Yeah.
And if women had done it, I mean, they'd be represented here. And if it's a matter of confidence of somebody in the
Yeah.
audience right now wants to run for election at the next member meeting, do it. Like, not a joke.
Hey, we're going to have a lunch meeting with the women tomorrow, Sarah. Encourage them running for
Can we respond to these things?
No, we're still going around.
What's your name and your role?
Evan, I'm the secretary and director.
Oh, one last thing to Evan. Will you allow him to borrow your mystery message?
Yeah.
Yeah? Well, give it to, tell him.
Precision is an act of love.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you.
Because that's what I hear you saying. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Navneet, and I'm one of the directors.
Okay.
I'm glad to be here,
Oh,
and
good.
I'm glad you are organizing, with all these people, and at least we can talk about some of the things we want to talk as a director.
Yes. What's a hot spot for you?
There are a bunch of, I think what I see is coming to a collective results or end. That's the only hard button for me. What happens, some of the things happen in the past that there was no collective decision.
No
And,
collective decision.
Right, and that's a big hard spot for me. If we have a
Okay.
co-op, if there are directors, I would imagine that we work as a team rather than
Okay.
individual. And yeah,
Mm.
That's all.
Okay, so maybe we'll come back to you for some hot spots.
Sounds good.
Seems like you you got some juice about that. Yeah.
So I'm Ed. I was actually a former director, and I have to say I'm so thankful for all of you stepping forward, stepping up into that role, because I know it's a lot of work, right? Because it's all new, a lot of tough decisions that you're all making, and I'm relieved I'm no longer a director, frankly, because I've got so much other stuff to attend to.
Right.
I miss being part of the director board, but I'm also relieved because I now have time to do other things I need to get done. So I just want to let you all know that I appreciate your role as directors, and I know that there's tough matters to decide and so forth, and more ahead, many more ahead. So thank you.
And any hot spots you know about for this group?
No, I'm not plugged into the things meeting to meeting, so I don't have enough visibility to comment really.
That's fine. Yeah.
Hi.
Wow. Hi.
My name is Lilia, and I'm pretty new member to the team, to the
Yeah.
co-op. So I'm still learning. And thank you, Greg. I'm very privileged to be part of the team, part of the co-op, and member. It's such a new space for me also, and it's so much to learn.
What's your aspiration in working with the co-op? Like, what's your dream?
My dream, it's like everybody to work together as a team, and even though we do mistakes, we learn from them. We do not dwell on them, just move forward, and do not spend a lot of the good energy on the problem, but rather spend the energy on the solution.
And you have a big job, right?
Yes.
You have a big job sort of managing Greg. Yes?
Yes, it's, yes.
Probably there's not enough money in the world, huh?
Exactly, yes, thank you, yes. I think, yes.
Touche!
Very good question.
Obviously not very well. Well, welcome, and I know,
Thank you.
yeah, that you will. You bring a heartfulness, and you also bring a sense of organization that I think can really serve. So
thank you.
I think you're well suited for your job.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you for the welcome.
Yeah. Did you say something in this role?
It hasn't gotten to David.
Okay, let's do it.
Hi,
Hi.
my name is David Curran, and I'm here representing myself.
David Curran as David Curran.
Yeah. I'm a independent director. I like the independent director that was on the letter from Vlad there. I'm going to use that as well. I like that. So I'm independent and a director.
Do you know of any hot spots for this group?
Well, for the board, I guess our main challenge has been the amount of time that we've had to work with. We've had to work very fast. And I think that sometimes haste is a function of disorganization. So we have that, we have that to work on. I think that's our challenge as a board, one of our challenges.
And board members are elected and for different terms? Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay, yes.
I know what I'd like to reflect to you all now that I've heard from each of you. What strikes me is that you're a representation of this larger body of people.
Yeah.
And as a representation of that body, I notice that you each bring a very different perspective, a different set of skills. And if we think about your group as literally a human body, that each one of you plays a different part, and you must work together to be a whole. And if we use that as a metaphor, we can understand that actually it's really important that you all bring different perspectives. That you're not the same with the same skill sets, that you're not going to agree on everything. And to recognize our differences as gifts to the system.
Yeah, I agree completely. Greg and I have talked several times about what makes a successful team. And in your paraphrase, it's the qualities of leadership and having all the right qualities to make sure the needs are represented by the group, not that any one of us needs to step into all and have all the perfect qualities ourselves, but that's how we round each other out.
Beautiful.
Actually, I want to say something exactly to that point. Recently, Navneet brought to me some stuff that I realized I really should listen to and really pay attention to that had to do with the co-op's exposure. I mean, I don't like to think a lot about those kinds of risks. Frankly, I'm too busy working on the technology and thinking on how to grow the co-op in a positive direction. But Navneet brought to me a bunch of considerations that had to do with our exposure legally and those essentially as a kind of a security attack vector. And even though I didn't like to think about it, I was really grateful to you to bring that perspective to me and to go through that. So it's a different mindset. And I'm really glad that someone is occupying that mindset.
So is there a hotspot, either something of the past that needs to be cleared or some way of orienting to something present or future that it would be good to be transparent and open about?
I got one.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm really sad that we have 2 members of the board not present. Okay. At the governance forum. I mean, there are all kinds of other places and meetings where board members might miss. But the governance forum seems to be the unmissable meeting for board members. So I feel it.
I kind of want to reiterate the whole haste thing. I also feel that as like my biggest kind of, like I don't really understand the hurry. I don't really know why we're so rushed. And I would like to. You know, I mean, I understand, okay, we need to solve climate change. but if we can't even govern the platform and don't know the first thing about our shared future, like why are we running?
Yeah, I second that. I think that sometimes it feels like some of the urgency is a little contrived, and that we could, if we wanted to, slow down and make better decisions. You know.
People are making requests, and those requests are sometimes met and sometimes not, but urgency is not actually present, right? Like that's one of those like 12 worlds or whatever. Like it's not actually there is no actual urgency. It's like an urgency is actually empty and meaningless. So what that means is, like, if you guys are feeling urgency or feeling like there's haste, that's something that I think you're bringing into it.
It still seems okay for now. So let me give it. So I understand a lot of times is how we respond to indicators of urgency, but you know, I'll just share with you all, and Greg, you and I've talked about this before, but it's healing for me to say it again. So if I can, you know, but when I was director and very actively involved in the co-op, you know, I felt like I was doing a lot of cleaning up after Greg's initiatives. And so, you know, that is one of the main reasons I left as a director, because I didn't want to be stuck in that pattern that I felt stuck in. So an example, it was towards the end of December, the co-op was getting ready for its private sale. Greg calls me up Friday afternoon. Ed, can you close a bunch of sales this weekend by Sunday night? Because we've made these promises. And, you know, subsequently, I and a couple others, but the majority of it was me. Navneet helped some too. It's closed $15 million of funds. So it was urgent in my mind. It was important. And I felt set up. Now, you know, it was worth it. Yeah. It was worth it. Yeah. But that happened more often than I would like.
So
okay, we
I think
a little hotspot here.
So I think one thing we need to realize, we need to excel as a group rather than individual, right? I mean, at some point we may have urgency for some things, not necessarily all the time.
Just like listen to yourself.
Oh. Get a new mic.
It's like, ah. Now, okay, now I think it's better. Can you guys hear me? What I was saying earlier is we need to excel as a group, you know, rather than individual. At times we may have urgency, I think, depending on scenario. Like one example, what Ed mentioned, I think we needed to close some of things because I think there were some restrictions based on the voting membership date, right? And for some of the decisions, of course, we rushed to take them. I mean, wasn't required, but we did that anyway. So I think that's the reason I was saying earlier, you know, as a group, we need to make collective decisions so that everybody mean, especially, board of directors, come to a consensus in a way that whether it's really beneficial for community or not. I mean, at times we have to take decisions very quick, We are in a business, of course, and you need to take some decisions quick.
So just to say, we're running close to the end of our time, and I want to say a couple of things, but you go ahead.
So it seems to me, and this is my impression of this, that a lot of this is a function of the way that Greg is as a leader, meaning an inspirational leader who rules with respect rather than authority, if that makes sense to people. So instead of saying, you are in charge of doing this, do it by this time, instead it is, okay, I think we ought to do this. That's my sort of informed opinion. Here's why I think that.
Yeah.
And other people are like, okay, that's a really good point. We should probably do that. And if Greg comes to you and says, like, I think we should probably do this thing, it's a really good idea, and here's why, and we need to have it done by this day, you do it by that day.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah.
Let me just say one brief thing. So, and what this points to is when you brought up the point of like, why are we talking about universes and woo-woo stuff? Like the reason that you do that is because you do what you say, and then so you say what you do, and then you do what you say.
Yeah.
And so the reason that I'm saying this is because if you say it's just about integrity, right? And so it's not about decisions, it's actually about choices, which is a distinction that we just get to make as a group. We just make a choice.
Yeah.
Because we want to do it. And so like, and that's just like how you create. And so if Greg is, it's just establishing the delivery by the deadline. Right, and then if we don't meet the deadline, it's not you don't have to judge the person. You just get to say what the impact is.
Yes.
And say how you won't do that again in the future.
Right. Yeah, and what I'd like to say is that probably Greg's style is not going to change. Well, maybe modify a little bit, but
I think it's important.
There's always room for growth.
Wait, okay, there's always room for growth. But if something doesn't work for you, if a style or a timing intensity or something doesn't work, you take yourself out of the equation. We're grown-ups here, so we don't need to suffer unnecessarily. And as long as we can recognize that, I think the system can work.
Yeah. I mean, what I actually did, in that regard, what I actually did was I called Ed and I said, how would you like to make a certain amount of money?
Okay.
I didn't say, because I was more than willing to take it all upon myself. What I said was, because I was worried at the time you hadn't sold rocks, and I was worried that you needed cash. And so I called you up and I said, how would you like to make a certain amount of money to help with the sale? And because this is a time crunch, it's a larger figure than otherwise. So I didn't actually say, you have to do this, or there was a mess. We actually had a team that could do it. I wanted to make sure that you guys were helped.
Yeah. All right. So good intentions, but the principle still holds. Yeah. If as a member of this group, this board of directors, it's not working for you, you shouldn't serve. And if you are a member of this board of directors and there's a governance meeting, you should be here.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, it's the idea of growing up, showing up and growing up and being responsible. So we are going to need to stop this. We sort of did a hot spot to some extent, but I want to invite all the community to come. Everybody come and stand behind us, please. Every single person. Okay, so thank you all for being willing to be naked and to be naked.
She said we were going to have fun.
Yeah, it's okay to have fun.
That's the after party.
Yeah. Yeah, but to look at yourselves and to clear things that need to be cleared and to express differing opinions and to feel the deep aspiration and purpose and identity that you're cultivating. It's quite remarkable. And I'd love to hear just a couple of words. David, I want to hear something from you.
Yeah, because David's up soon.
Yeah, I am. Thanks. Any point in particular? Well, there are a number of things, so I don't want to take up a whole lot of time. I will say that we talked about it yesterday, about being here at this time, this moment for a reason. And I've been in this transaction business for years. I feel like I've finally found a platform, a person, a group, an infrastructure that makes sense from a standpoint of creating, designing, implementing, and the financial benefits that inure to that infrastructure, that ecosystem. This is a unique opportunity, and so I feel honored to be a part of it and to help in any way I can.
Thank you. I really appreciate all the wonderful work that the board, the committees, the officers are doing. And all this afternoon, since I was in the same conversation in the afternoon, and I really appreciate the candor of this conversation. I think it is as much as it could be. The one thing, as I think through these themes of, obviously there's a lot to be done, it needs to be done in a very timely and as fast a process as possible, as fast a time frame as possible. But one thing that I observed seems to be out of alignment with that to me, because I think we really need to look at the board members and the officers and the committee members and say, how can we reduce the overlap as much as possible, minimize the overlap as much as possible so that you have more people that can actually take on, they have the time, they have the energy, they have the talents to be able to do that. I mean, I understand there needs to be some commonality between the board and officers so that there's proper communication and proper management of that. But I think as a principle, we should have as minimal overlap as possible, ideally one person, one role. This way we know the person can be held accountable and has the time and energy and talents to go get the help that they need to get, rather than the same person trying to do 1,000 things, which I think is true for most of you are sitting here. So that's kind of my observation.
I'm touched by the energy that you guys are creating by standing around this group. And I'm just watching the faces. And it seems like there's something being felt here at the center that you guys are all a part of. Mm-hmm.
I have a funny impulse. Karen, would you be put on the spot to say a few words about your experience?
I am relatively new member, and so I'm kind of being thrown in at the deep end here. It's been quite the learning experience, and I have to say I've absorbed so much. I've absorbed so much through this experience, and I feel like I've had this absorption experience, what Archain is over the last 2 days, that I would never experience any other way. So I'm really very thankful for that. And my experience of this is that it kind of gives me a peering under the hood in a way that connects with what people's roles all could be and where they emanate from and where they're been and where they're going, which I don't think I would have ever been exposed to any other way. So I'm incredibly grateful.
Last words. How about? Well, I mean, yeah, gigs up. Actually, I want to do first words. So, looking forward, just in the next few minutes, go listen to David at Cocktails. David has some really interesting things to say. And also looking forward, tomorrow, I'm not teaching Tai Chi. Viola Brumbaugh is teaching Tai Chi, and she is amazing. If you want to see someone who is plugged into the flow, if you want to plug into a flow to be able to move fast, come work with Viola. Yeah, yeah. And with that, I'm sure everybody wants a break.
I want to remind you that today is the start of the Miracle Month. For the next 30 days, everything you do is multiplied 100,000 times. Make use of it. Let's go. Yay.
My name is David Otto. Thank you, thank you. I am outside counsel to Archain Co-op. I've been involved with helping on a number of legal issues, structural issues, financial issues. Been working closely with in-house counsel Evan Jensen. And this presentation is meant to be interactive, so any questions along the way, feel free. Ask me. The idea is to bring a little bit of perspective around the legal, financial, sort of operational imperatives with this structure, co-op structure, and what the legal parameters are relative to distinguishing between a security and an asset for purposes of the financing of the business vis-a-vis the ROC or the ultimately the REV. A little bit about my background, 30 years in the M&A, securities, corporate finance business. So I come at this problem, that is the regulatory perspective, both from the SEC and the CFTC, from a great deal of experience in working with securities issues and working with regulatory bodies and understanding the sort of analytical framework and the concerns. Ultimately, the regulatory concern, at least at the SEC level, is about disclosure and about protecting investors. So let's get into it. It's a little bit of history. I think everyone's probably fairly familiar with the history of crypto and where we are now and where we're coming specifically. We'll jump right into it. So SEC v. Howey is a seminal case that's applicable throughout the crypto market and directly applicable to issuers because it is the case the SEC uses to attempt to quantify whether or not what you're doing by virtue of financing an initiative with a cryptocurrency, whether or not you're doing that with a security. So the Howey test is a four-part test. The four-part test is an investment, and the investment is essentially money or a money substitute going one way for something coming to you. Pretty straightforward. An investment in a common enterprise. Common enterprise, certainly, Archain would qualify, as would any business where people are investing. So investment in a common enterprise where the expectation of profits are to be derived from the efforts of third parties. So, and just a little bit of background. So Howie, that case involved a citrus orchard. And the Howie and his compatriots were selling interests in the citrus orchard. The money that was raised was going to be used to plant, harvest, transport, and sell citrus products from the orchard. The instruments that were sold, the challenge was whether or not they were investment contracts. The case was determined that in fact, those interests are investment contracts, and they're investment contracts because of the four-part analysis. Investment, common enterprise, expectation of profits, and the efforts of third parties. So how does that relate to what we're doing? And I'll go through it in more detail and ask any questions, but essentially, and I'm working on this for a talk we're going to do, a continuing legal education seminar that I'm sponsoring with the Cooley firm end of May. And what I'm looking to do, and I was talking to one of the fellows here earlier today, is to tokenize the Howie fact pattern. And if you tokenize the Howie fact pattern, you think about that, and then you layer on top of that the co-op structure. So think of the citrus orchard as a co-op. And if the citrus orchard was a cooperative, and parties were becoming members in the cooperative, and in that cooperative, they were able to monetize a token and to use that for purposes of designing, developing, processing, selling product out of that orchard, that cooperative. There's no security analysis. There's not a security. You've got cooperative interests. You've got a token that's exchanged for value that represents that currency or exchange of value, and there's no third-party reliance. The expectation of profits from the efforts of third parties is the critical piece of the analysis. It's kind of hard in every instance where cryptocurrency is being sold. It's kind of hard to argue that it's not an investment in a common enterprise. So it's more than kind of hard. It's just not happening. So you focus on expectation of profits from the efforts of third parties in these instances. What we've done with our chain is form the cooperative. The cooperative minted the rock, and ultimately we'll do a one-for-one exchange for Rev. So the cooperative minting the rock and then selling the rock. There's the investment. Doesn't matter if it's USD, ETH, BTC. That's a transaction. That's an investment. The key is anything that's happening in this cooperative, is that, for purposes of developing value, creating value, is that being done by third parties or is it being done by members? And if it's being done by members, and if members are driving this co-op, and members are driving value, and members are identifying opportunities that benefit the cooperative mission, then you are not looking at third parties, you are doing it yourself. And that's why this model is so incredible. It's also why all this discussion around membership we had earlier today, Kenny, and participation and duties, responsibilities, rights of membership, that's why it's so critical. This isn't a passive activity, nor should it be. The other interesting thing, as we talked a little bit about the other day, is the fact that as members, we're all small minority holders. It's all one for one. Whether you've got 5 million rock or 2 rock, doesn't matter. It's a one-for-one vote as membership. And so that vote and that participation amplifies the nature and extent of your participation. You aren't squeezed out because you didn't put up $1 million, $100,000, whatever the number is. Your membership is what drives your ability to participate. Your willingness to participate and your desire to participate are what make the model work. So it's very much a function of membership activism. And events like this underscore that. Events like this prove the case. They prove the case that this isn't an organization where people are sitting around expecting value to be derived from the efforts of third parties. People here are expecting value to be driven by their efforts, and they should be. There's no one more capable or more focused than the people in this room, the people that have been here the last couple of days. And, frankly, no one more vested. So why not? So this model, by the way, works not only if you're designing a next generation blockchain, it works on so many levels when it comes to trying to break down the legal standard and analysis around whether or not what you're doing in the sale of that cryptocurrency is a security or an asset. So this is the heart of the analysis. This is the heart of what everyone's looking at and looking to comply with or not, understanding, trying to develop a framework for how do you do this? How do you sell crypto? How do you create a new platform that eviscerates the VC model? But that's not just hype. We were talking, Peter, a little bit about Resonate. Resonate goes into a VC fundraise. You probably can't get anybody to answer your phone call or get them to open the door for you. You don't need that model. That model's done. And this isn't just hype. It's happening. It's happening right here. And it's happening with another company, cooperative. Resonate's a cooperative. Shops are cooperative. Those models work. And it works from a structural standpoint. It works from a legal standpoint. So what's the wild card? Participation. It's absolutely participation. If you're in, and you've got to participate. And there's got to be evidence of that. It's interesting, as an aside, I mentioned it earlier today, we are going through a little Q&A with the Washington State Department of Financial Institutions around the offering. And one of their questions is, well, we see in your documentation, we've sent them everything, and we expected full review, and we're getting it. And one of the questions is, we see what it is, and members are, what it is members are committing to do. How do you force them to do it? You don't force people to participate. If they're not in, they're not in. The representation is from the member. They will commit to doing this list of things. By the way, that list of things can grow over a period of time. You don't have to have a particular expertise at the time that you become a member. Your commitment to participate is sufficient enough. The participation among the membership, as opposed to the membership looking to benefit from the efforts of third parties, is the linchpin to this analysis. And it's where we are. From a regulatory standpoint, it's where we are from a practical. We're doing it. We're here. And it's meetings like this that support it, that establish it. as legitimate and meaningful. It's not sort of ephemeral, conceptual. We'll get around to it. It's brass tacks. The meeting we were in earlier, afterward, I looked at Evan and I said, we're making the sausage. It's not pretty, but it's got to happen. So that's what we're doing. That's the Howey analysis, or the Howey test. So, the SEC did a report on the Dow financing, the Slockett transaction, and the SEC came to a few conclusions around that transaction. If you net it out, what the SEC said is, not sure we're comfortable with the way this went down because whilst the buyers of the token and the had voting rights that came with that purchase, those voting rights went through curators. And the curators, a handful of them, determined which projects were going to get funded and which ones were going to have priority for purposes of the Dow committing resources, time, and effort to develop those projects. And the SEC said that's a problem. And it's a problem because you're taking away the voting capability, the voting right, or an equal access to the platform, to the opportunity. So anybody who's wondering why 1-to-1 in the membership as opposed to some correlation to your rock ownership, that's why. The voting, the equal voting power among the members is a critical component of this. Now, you could argue on the other hand, wow, you give everybody one vote, a lot of unvested people could create problems. Yeah, sure they could. The expectation is that won't happen. And it's because people with a vested interest will participate, and that participation will typically be to advance the cause, not jeopardize it. And so that's where that comes from. But the SEC's report on the Dow was very much a function of voting rights and responsibilities that went with that vote, and they felt that the Dow had circumscribed those voting rights by forcing that vote to move through curators. And the curators determined what projects would get funded, and that's not particularly democratic. So the SEC said, we've got a problem with this. Without the vote, I'll go back a couple of those other slides, but without the vote, you run into yet another test. And the other test is a risk capital test. So the risk capital test is a complement to the Howey test. So the regulatory sort of infrastructure at the federal and the state level, the risk capital test is a test that comes out of California, adopted by Washington, a handful of other states. So the SEC in the state of Washington, although we're not talking the SEC, this is not a sale of security, we're talking the state of Washington. But the regulatory overview here says, even if you satisfy Howey, you're not an investment contract. Because despite the investment, common enterprise, this is not a situation where the expectation of profits is coming from the efforts of third parties. Even if you satisfy that, you still have to satisfy the risk capital test. And risk capital test says that if you're engaged in a sale, that unless you get actual or practical control, your capital's at risk. Actual capital control in connection with the exchange, the investment. So unless you have actual or practical control, you, investor, you have to satisfy the risk capital. Your capital's at risk, and therefore you have to satisfy a risk capital test. Risk capital test says it's a security. If you have no actual or practical control, you're selling securities because you're putting people's capital at risk. So, again, why 1 for 1 on the membership and the voting? Because it satisfies risk capital test. It gives real power to everyone equally, regardless of investment amount. So it isn't a participation analysis at all. It's a voting right. Do you have actual practical? If you wanted to, you as a shareholder, could you reach out to the rest of your membership, can you reach out to the rest of your membership and motivate that body to do something? Or are there impediments to that? And if there are impediments to that, you don't have actual or practical control. That was part of the problem with the DAO. No actual practical control. So that's a big issue. And it's also an issue that's perfectly addressed with the co-op on a 1-to-1 voting structure. So that makes, that's a complementary test and a complementary analysis that has to be engaged in along with the Howey test. So there's a lot of talk in the legal community about, well, crypto is all about buying low, selling high. It's no different than security. That's all that's going on. There's case law that addresses that concept. It's called the market forces test. So, again, you apply Howey, you apply risk capital, you satisfy those. The fact that your cryptocurrency is offered at 20 cents and it's trading at $2, that's not an investment where you're looking to a profit or anticipating returns. That's a market force reality. So it's a function of market forces. The investment happens at the front end. The expectation of value, profits, upside is a function of participation and activism. The 1-to-1 vote satisfies the risk capital test because as long as you have the ability to have actual practical control, whether or not you exercise it, you have it. That satisfies risk capital. The fact then that the crypto moves from 20 to 2, 5 to 10, whatever your numbers are, that's a function of market forces. And what are market forces driven by? Participation. Because it has no value unless it's created right here. It has no value. And so that, and then the articulation, the dissemination of that value, here's where we are from a tech standpoint, here's where we are from a capital raise standpoint, here's where we are from a human resources standpoint, creates more value. That's how and why this model works. It's absolutely a new paradigm, a completely new paradigm for financing. And when I say it eviscerates VC, it's not a joke and it's not just talk. It does. It works. It's a model. We have it with Resonate. We're going to have it with 2 others. These companies generally are not going to get the time of day at a VC firm. This model works. And then when you attach a business like Resonate to a blockchain protocol like our chain, and you start talking about how that execution works from a prospective business opportunity and business transaction opportunity, that too becomes part of the equation for determining value or driving market forces. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, hang on. Oh, okay, so this is, yeah. So that's kind of the hard analysis where we are from a regulatory standpoint, from the SEC, from the state. In December, the SEC came out with a report on cryptocurrencies and initial coin offerings. And Clayton, chair of the SEC, it's a 7, 8, 10-page piece of work. But part of it, that first paragraph, he's, yeah. A token that represents a participation interest in an entity, in a group. So that participation interest may not implicate securities laws. It may be an efficient way for the club's operators to fund acquisitions, facilitate distribution. So what are we doing? We've got a co-op. We're funding it to facilitate development, to facilitate design, to facilitate operations for the purpose of acquiring businesses to be deployed on the blockchain for future value to those businesses and the people that are involved in them. That parallels, that Book of the Month Club concept, parallels what we're doing. It parallels the co-op model. If you create a cooperative to do something, and you satisfy Howey, you satisfy risk capital, you got to have one-to-one voting, you're creating a Book of the Month Club or something similar. And then you're using capital raised to help drive, what are you selling? What are you building? What are you designing? That's what it's doing. And are you making it a more efficient, a different model for the development of that opportunity? Whether it's music or e-commerce. It is absolutely, it's in the sweet spot, this structural model, the co-op. And the design that our chain has, and that design can be replicated for everyone we're working with. It doesn't have to be, it can be. Okay. So we've gone through this. There's a lot of talk about utility tokens and the utility token analysis. And basically, the way it breaks down is regulators are saying, and a number of lawyers, that unless it has, unless the token has very clear, functional, bright line utility, it's a security. That logic's flawed in a couple of respects. There are plenty things that don't have immediate utility that aren't securities, right? A barrel of oil out of the ground isn't that interesting until it's refined. But that barrel of oil isn't a security because it has no utility until it gets refined. The CFTC has determined that, at least BTC, but crypto in general is a commodity. And they're going to treat it as such. It's an asset, and it needs to work as such. And it's up to the issuer to ensure that. So the utility token, the utility analysis, the simple one is, I get the token and I can go deploy it to do this, buy some compute or get a discount on something I want to acquire. There's some interesting sort of foundational utility. But what about utility that's integrated into a token that ensures you're able to develop your Book of the Month Club, your Book of the Month Club equivalent, that you're able to identify assets and bring those into your co-op and deploy those assets more efficiently. That's utility as well. So the utility argument isn't just the immediate ability to take that token and push it out for something in exchange. It's also the ability to use that to to advance an agenda, to acquire assets, to build a next generation blockchain. And that's a large part of the argument with the Department of Financial Institutions. That the utility is very much a function of how it's deployed in the co-op to create value. And the value propositions are all over the place, right? I mean, it's hiring people to do some of the tech work, or hiring somebody to find interesting decentralized applications, or hiring somebody to articulate the value proposition of the on-chain blockchain, and educate people as to how to develop in Rolang. Those are all value propositions, and therefore utility. Yeah, this was, I put one, where was the, I like the Smith, and kind of the Adam Smith quote, and kind of relates to what Greg was talking about the other day. That where are we? Yeah, Smith believed that the core desire of all people was to be both loved and worthy of love. And Keynes believed the highest possible human life came from creating and appreciating artistic works. Money is not some separate force, easily divided. Money is changing now. It's changing very fast. This is nothing that everyone in this room doesn't already know. The interesting thing, I think, is that the concept, the store of value, the representation of money, of currency, it's what you will accept as valuable in exchange. Anybody here do any work for our chain? Who gets paid in rock? Okay, look at that. Yeah. Oh. Okay. Yeah.
All right, so I don't mean to. All right, so to illustrate that point, this business card right here, I got this from my Lyft driver last night when he drove me down to dinner. And I said, oh, this is interesting, this coffee thing. And it had all of the crypto logos on it. And I said, well, that's kind of weird. Do you accept crypto? And he's like, I love crypto. The only thing I want is crypto. And I said, I got a really interesting idea for you. There's this cooperative here in Seattle that you can join, make your voice heard, participate at a one-to-one value, and get paid in that currency for your coffee. And I told him I'd buy some with Rock. And he said, yes, please. Yes, please. Yes. Okay, I'm going to read this out for everybody, so please take a note, because I also told him I was going to tell you about this, and I want you all to buy coffee and flood him with orders in whatever crypto you want. Okay, it's called foodforestfarms.com. Foodforestfarms.com. Local roasted coffee. This is way better than Starbucks. Way better. Okay?
Yeah, there it is. And I don't want to sound too promotional or evangelical, but this is where it's going. Money's changing. It's changed. Look at the show of hands of people who are taking rock right now. You're going to take it If you don't think it's got value, it's worth something, able to use it as a store of value, as an exchange of value, of course not. And it's only becoming more ubiquitous. And so we're here to do it. We're implementing a platform. We're minting a currency. And we're going to deploy that both with respect to the development of the community, but also with respect to identifying opportunities that can benefit from and use this blockchain. Okay, and for anybody who hasn't been around for a while and wasn't involved in sort of the inside discussion around how to do the token sale, there are best practices that are circulating among the community, and so we followed every one of them, obviously. But there's a best practice sort of scenario. They're all up there: white paper, development roadmap, fair token pricing, token not an investment. One of the interesting things about the private token sale is there was no solicitation. And solicitation is a big part of the securities compliance regiment. So that no solicitation is it's a good thing. It isn't something that's fatal. You can do it, but it helps. It helps to be able to identify privately interested parties and to target them and have them on board as part of the team and as part of the investment pool. The solicitation is absolutely allowed, and in fact, another point of interest that people should know in talks with the DFI. So the DFI says, okay, we understand it's an asset, we understand how it works, we understand what you're doing, but all that aside, humor us. Imagine it's a security. What exemption are you relying on? So you have to plan for it. Our exemption, just so everyone knows, is a 506C. 506C is under Regulation D, part of the 33 Act, and it allows for solicitation, private market. This is, by the way, this is for securities. It's if it was ever determined that the rock was a security. It is not. And I'm betting my career on the fact that it will never be determined to be. But, thanks. But the regulators, as they will, okay, we hear all that. That's interesting. Now let's just assume it's a security. Where's your exemption? We have an exemption if we were ever to go that direction. And it's a 506C. And that's, a 506C essentially says you can solicit to the world. Just make sure that whoever comes in as an accredited investor. We've got accredited investor questionnaires. They're filled out. So we're fine. But it's an interesting exercise. And it's an interesting contrast between sort of standard regulatory behavior and what's going on in this market. Okay, I'm getting short on time here. Anyway, so best practices, they're important and they're followed. The financial relationships with co-op member groups really here to emphasize the importance of those groups that have a level of expertise and capability and want to do something to advance the objectives of the co-op, that it's available. It's not only available, it's happening right now in this co-op with our chain. So that's part of that continued participation and creation of value by members, not third parties. Again, store of value, means of payment, unit of account. Those are sort of standard sort of 3 parts of what makes a currency a currency. And the fact that there is willingness to accept it and to use it and to hold it, satisfies all three of those. We did a little bit of this, I think, yesterday. Centralized organizations, pretty straightforward. Top-down, private board meetings. Every one of us, as a minority shareholder, would get 0 to no attention. And that's the way it works. You've got to have some juice in a private or publicly held company, meaning amount of stock, ownership, to have a voice. That's not the case here. Yeah, everyone's one-to-one, and meetings like this, governance forum, as I said earlier, it underscores the value and the importance and the reality of what's happening. So again, decentralized structure around design, deployment, HR. These are all parts of the team. I am running out of time. This is pretty straightforward. So 6 principles of a co-op. Thus far, as far as I can tell, we're doing just fine on all fronts. So it takes work, it takes ongoing management, it takes ongoing participation. And that is it. Thank you.